Hello, and welcome to my channel, Reading Little Blue Books, out loud. This is a little blue book. It is Little Blue Book number 239, and it is titled 26 Men and a Girl, and it was written by Maxim Gorky. Now, I've discovered, reading this book, that it is actually 4 short stories. None of them have anything to do with the other, except for the fact that they were all written by the same man. The copyright in this is probably mid-20s, 1924 through 27. And we left off, I believe, at the bottom of page 18. Yep, top of page 19, and that's where we'll pick up. We forcibly proved to each other that our divinity was a strong divinity, and we would come victorious out of this ordeal. We began at last to fancy that we had not worried enough on the soldier, that he would forget his dispute, and that we ought to pick his vanity more keenly. From that day we began to live a different life, a life of nervous tension, such as we had never known before. We spent whole days in arguing together. We all grew, as it were, sharper, and got to talk more and better. It seemed to us that we were playing some sort of game with the devil. And the stake on our side was Tanya. We felt a sort of delighted terror, and life was so interesting that we did not even notice that our employer had taken advantage of our preoccupation to increase our work by 14 pounds of dough a day. We seemed, indeed, not even tired of our work. Tanya's name was on our lips all day long, and every day we looked for her with a certain special impatience. Sometimes we pictured to ourselves that she would come to us, and it would not be the same Tanya as of old, but somehow different. We said nothing to her, however, of the dispute regarding her. We asked her no questions, and behaved as well and affectionately to her as ever. But even in this a new element crept in, alien to our old feeling for Tanya. And that new element was keen curiosity, keen and cold as a steel knife. "Mates, today the time's up," our baker said to us one morning as he set to work. We were well aware of it, without his reminder, but still we were thrilled. "Look at her! She'll be here directly," suggested the baker. One of us cried out in a troubled voice, "Why?" as though one could notice anything. And again an eager, noisy discussion sprang up among us. Today we were about to prove how pure and spotless was the vessel into which we had poured all that was best in us. This morning, for the first time, it became clear to us that we really were playing a great game, that we might indeed, through the exaction of this proof of purity, lose our divinity altogether. During the whole of the intervening fortnight, we had heard that Tanya was persistently followed by the soldier, but not one of us had thought of asking her how she had behaved toward him, and she came every morning to fetch her kringles, and was the same toward us as ever. This morning, too, we heard her voice outside, "You poor prisoners, here I am." We opened the door, and when she came in, we all remained, contrary to our usual custom, silent. Our eyes fixed on her, we did not know how to speak to her, what to ask her. And there we stood in front of her, a gloomy, silent crowd. She seemed to be surprised at this unusual reception, and suddenly we saw her turn white and become uneasy. Then she asked in a choking voice, "Why are you like this? And you?" The baker flung at her grimly, never taking his eyes off her. "What am I?" "Nothing." "Well then, give me quickly the little kringles." Never before had she bidden us hurry. "There's plenty of time," said the baker, not stirring and not removing his eyes from her face. Then, suddenly, she turned round and disappeared through the door. The baker took his shovel and said calmly, turning away toward the oven, "Well, that settles it. But a soldier? A common beast like that? A low cur!" Like a flock of sheep, we all pressed round the table, sat down silently, and began listlessly to work. Soon, however, one of us remarked, "Perhaps, after all—" "Shut up!" shouted the baker. We were all convinced that he was a man of judgment, a man who knew more than we did about things, and at the sound of his voice we were convinced of the soldier's victory, and our spirits became sad and downcast. At 12 o'clock, while we were eating our dinner, the soldier came in. He was as clean and as smart as ever, and looked at us, as usual, straight in the eyes, but we were all awkward in looking at him. "Now then, honored sirs, would you like me to show you a soldier's quality?" he said, chuckling proudly. "Go out into the passage and look through the crack. Do you understand?" We went into the passage and stood all pushing against one another, squeezed up to the cracks of the wooden partition of the passage that looked into the yard. We had not to wait long. Very soon Tanya, with hurried footsteps and a careworn face, walked across the yard, jumping over the puddles of melting snow and mud. She disappeared into the store cellar. Then, whistling, and not hurrying himself, the soldier followed in the same direction. His hands were thrust in his pockets. His mustaches were quivering. Rain was falling, and we saw how its drops fell into the puddles, and the puddles were wrinkled by them. The day was damp and gray, a very dreary day. Snow still lay on the roofs, but on the ground dark patches of mud had begun to appear, and the snow on the roofs too was covered by a layer of brownish dirt. The rain fell slowly with a depressing sound. It was cold and disagreeable for us waiting. The first to come out of the store cellar was the soldier. He walked slowly across the yard, his mustaches twitching, his hands in his pockets, the same as always. Then Tanya, too, came out. Her eyes were radiant with joy and happiness, and her lips were smiling. And she walked as though in a dream, staggering with unsteady steps. We could not bear this quietly. All of us at once rushed to the door, dashed out into the yard, and hissed at her, reviled her viciously, loudly, wildly. She started at seeing us, and stood as though rooted in the mud under her feet. We formed a ring around her, and malignantly, boy, that's a tough word for me to say, without restraint abused her with vile words, said shameful things to her. We did this not loudly, not hurriedly, seeing that she could not get away, that she was hemmed in by us, and we could deride her to our heart's content. I don't know why, but we did not beat her. She stood in the midst of us, and turned her head this way and that, as she heard our insults, and we, more and more violently, flung at her the filth and venom of our words. The color had left her face. Her blue eyes, so happy a moment before, opened wide. Her bosom heaved, and her lips quivered. We, in a ring round her, avenged ourselves on her as though she had robbed us. She belonged to us. We had lavished on her our best, and though that best was a beggar's crumb, still we were 26. She was 1. Equal to her guilt. How we insulted her. She was still mute, still gazing at us with her wild eyes, and a shiver ran all over her. We laughed, roared, yelled. Other people ran up from somewhere and joined us. One of us pulled Tanya by the sleeve of her blouse. Suddenly her eyes flashed. Deliberately she raised her hands to her head, and straightening her hair, she said loudly but calmly, straight in our faces, "Ah, you miserable prisoners!" And she walked straight at us. Walked as directly as though we had not been before her, as though we were not blocking her way. And hence it was that no one did actually prevent her passing. Walking out of our ring, without turning round, she said loudly and with indescribable contempt, "Ah, you scum! Brutes!" and was gone. We were left in the middle of the yard, in the rain, under the grey sky, without the sun. Then we went mutely away to our damp stone cellar, as before. The sun never peeped in at our windows, and Tanya came no more. And that is the end of the story, 26 Men and a Girl. The next story is On a Raft. Heavy clouds drift slowly across the sleepy river, and hang every moment lower and thicker. In the distance their ragged gray edges seem almost to touch the surface of the rapid and muddy waters, swollen by the floods of spring, and there, where they touch, an impenetrable wall rises to the skies, barring the flow of the river and the passage of the raft. The stream, swirling against this wall, washing vainly against it, with a wistful, wailing swish, seems to be thrown back on itself, and then to hasten away on either side, where lies the moist fog of a dark spring night. The raft floats onward, and the distance opens out before it into heavy cloud massed space. The banks of the river are invisible. Darkness covers them, and the lapping waves of a spring flood seem to have washed them into space. The river below has spread into a sea, while the heavens above, swathed in cloud masses, hang heavy, humid, and leaden. There is no atmosphere, no color in this gray, blurred picture. The raft glides swiftly and noiselessly, while out of the darkness appears suddenly bearing down on it a steamer, pouring from its funnels a merry crowd of sparks and churning up the water with the paddles of its great revolving wheels. The two red forward lights gleam every moment larger and brighter, and the masthead lantern sways slowly from side to side, as if winking mysteriously at the night. The distance is filled with the noise of the troubled water and the heavy thud, thud of the engines. "Look ahead!" is heard from the raft. The voice is that of a deep-chested man. Two men are standing aft, each grasping a long pole, which propel the raft and act as rudders. Matea, the son of the owner, a fair, weak, melancholy-looking lad of 22, and Sergei, a peasant hired to help in the work on board the raft, a bluff, healthy, red-bearded fellow, whose upper lip, raised with a mocking sneer, discloses a mouth filled with large, strong teeth. "Starboard!" a second cry vibrates through the darkness ahead of the rafts. "What are you shouting for? We know our business," Sergei growls raspingly, pressing his expanded chest against the pole. "Ouch! Pull harder, Matea!" Matea pushes with his feet against the damp planks that form the raft, and with his thin hands draws toward him the heavy steering pole, coughing hoarsely the while. "Harder to starboard, you cursed loafers!" the master cries again, anger and anxiety in his voice. "Shout away!" mutters Sergei. "Here's your miserable devil of a son who couldn't break a straw across his knees. And you put him to steer a raft, and then you yell so that all the river hears you. You were mean enough not to take a second steersman, so now you may tear your throat to pieces shouting." These last words were growled out loud enough to be heard forward, and as if Sergei wished they should be heard. The steamer passed rapidly alongside the raft, sweeping the frothing water from under her paddle wheels. The planks tossed up and down in the wash, and the oyster branches, fastening them together, groaned and scraped with a moist, plaintive sound. The lit-up portholes of the steamer seem a moment to rake the raft and the river with fiery eyes, reflected in the seething water, like luminous trembling spots. Then all disappears. The wash of the steamer sweeps backward and forward over the raft, the planks dance up and down. Matea, swaying with the movements of the water, clutches convulsively the steering pole to save himself from falling. "Well, well," says Sergei, laughing. So you're beginning to dance. Your father will start yelling again, or he'll perhaps come and give you 1 or 2 in the ribs. Then you'll dance to another tune. Port side now. Ouch! And with his muscles strung like steel springs, Sergei gives a powerful push to his pole, forcing it deep down into the water. Energetic, tall, mocking, and rather malicious, he stands barefooted, rigid, as if part of the planks, looking straight ahead, ready at any moment to change the direction of the raft. Just look there at your father kissing Marka. Aren't they a pair of devils? No shame and no conscience. Why don't you get away from them, Matea? Away from these pagan pigs. Why? Do you hear me? I hear, muttered Matea in a stifled voice without looking toward the spot which Sergei pointed to through the darkness, where the form of Matea's father could be seen. I hear, mocked Sergei, laughing ironically. You poor half-baked creature. A pleasant state of things indeed, he continued, encouraged by the apathy of Matea. And what a devil that old man is! He finds a wife for his son. He takes the son's wife away from him, and all's well. The old brute. Matea is silent, and looks astern up the river, where another wall of mist is formed. Now the clouds close in all round, and the raft hardly appears to move, but to be standing still in the thick dark water, crushed down by the heavy gray black vaporous masses which drift across the heavens and bar the way. The whole river seems like a fathomless hidden whirlpool, surrounded by immense mountains rising toward heaven, and capped with shrouding mists. The stillness suffocates, and the water seems spellbound with expectation as it beats softly against the raft. A great sadness and a timid questioning is heard in the faint sound, the only voice of the night, accentuating still more the silence. We want a little wind now, says Sergei. No, it's not exactly wind we want. That would bring rain, he replies to himself as he begins to fill his pipe. The match strikes, and the bubbling sound of a pipe being lighted is heard. A red gleam appears, throwing a glow over the big face of Sergei. And then, as the light dies down, he is lost in the darkness. Matea! He cries. His voice is now less brutal and more mocking. What is it? Matea replies, without moving his gaze from the distance where he seems, with his big sad eyes, to be searching for something. How did it happen, mate? How did it happen? What? Answered Matea, displeased. How did you come to marry? What a queer set-out. How was it? You brought your wife home, and then... Ha ha ha! What are you cackling about? Look out there! Came threateningly across the river. Damned beast! Ejaculates with delight. Sergei, and returns to the theme that interests him. Come, Matea, tell me. Tell me at once. Why not? Leave me alone, Sergei, Matea murmurs, entreatingly. I told you once. But knowing by experience that Sergei will not leave him in peace, he begins hurriedly. Well, I brought her home, and I told her I can't be your husband, Marka. You're a strong girl, and I am feeble, a sick man. I don't wish at all to marry you, but my father would force me to marry. He was always saying to me, get married, get married. I don't like women, I said, and you especially. You are too bold. Yes, and I can't have anything to do with it. You must understand, for me, it disgusts me, and it is a sin. And children? One is answerable to God for one's children. Disgust! Yells Sergei and laughs. Well, and what did Marka reply? What? She said we shall What shall I do?" And then she began to cry. "What have you got against me? Am I so dreadfully ugly?" "She is shameless, Sergey, and wicked. With all this health and strength of mine, must I go to my father-in-law?" And I answered, "If you like, go where you wish. That I cannot act against my soul. If I had love for you, well and good. But being as it is, how is it possible? Father Ivan says it is the deadliest sin. We are not beasts, are we?" She went on crying. "You have ruined my chances in life," and I pitied her very much. "It's nothing," I said. "Things will come out right. Or," I continued, "you can go into a convent." And she began to insult me. "You are a stupid fool, Matea, a coward." "Well, I'm blessed!" exclaimed Sergey in a delighted whisper. "So you told her straight to go into a convent?" "Yes, I told her to go," answered Matea simply. "And she told you you were a fool?" queried Sergey, raising his voice. "Yes, she insulted me." "And she was right, my friend. Yes, indeed, she was right. You deserve a proper hammering." And Sergey, changing suddenly his tone, continued with severity and authority, "Have you any right to go against the law? But did you go against it? Things are arranged in a certain way, and it's no use going against them. You mustn't even discuss them. But what did you do? You got some maggot into your head. Convent indeed, silly fool. What did the girl want? Did she want your convent? What a set of muddle-headed fools there seems to be now. Just think what's happening. You're neither fish, nor fowl, nor good. Red herring. And the girl's done for. She's living with an old man. And you drove the old man into sin. How many laws have you broken, you cleaver head?" "Law, Sergey, is in the soul. There is one law for everyone. Don't do things that are against your soul, and you will do no evil on the earth," answered Matea, in a slow, conciliatory tone, and nodding his head. "But you did do evil," answered Sergey energetically. "In the soul. A fine idea. There are many things in the soul. Certain things must be forbidden. The soul! You must first understand it, my friend, and then—" "No, it's not so, Sergey," replied Matea, with warmth, and he seemed to be inspired. "The soul, my friend, is always as clear as dew. It's true. Its voice lies deep down within us, and is difficult to hear. But if we listen, we can never be mistaken. If we act according to what is in our soul, we shall always act according to the will of God. God is in our soul, and therefore the law must be in it. The soul was created by God and breathed by God into man. We have only to learn to look into it, and we must look into it without sparing our own feelings." "You sleepy devils! Look ahead there!" The voice thundered from the forward part of the raft, and swept back down the river. In the strength of the sound, one could recognize that the owner of the voice was healthy, energetic, and pleased with himself. A man with large and conscious vitality. He shouted not because he had to give a necessary order to the steering men, but because his soul was full of life. And strength, and this life and strength wanted to find free expression, so it rushed forth in that thunderous and forceful sound. And I think we'll stop there for part 2, and we'll see you in part 3. Thanks for listening.